Welcome back to Road Gang Radio. Join Jimmy Mack and Lindsay Lawler's Gang of the Airwaves by subscribing to Radio Nemo on YouTube.
We celebrate all kinds.
Make it official. After all, if you're listening, you're already in the gang. The Road Gang.
Ooh, you are. And get blisters on your fingers and hit that like button. Spread the word. Spread the word. And speaking of spreading the word, Chillu, Tin Ring. Jimmy Mack, hello.
Yo ho ho and a bottle of rum. Hoist the mainsails, here I come. Ain't no room on board for the insincere. You're my witness, I'm your mutineer. Thinking about Warren Zevon, who had an amazing induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame the other night, courtesy of Mr. David Letterman.
Dude.
Just the best.
You know who also he reminds me of?
Who's that? Dave?
Yep.
Yeah, David Letterman reminds me of Dave Nemo. He has a certain sort of delivery that is kind of spot on. It's just terrific. Where you think, where are you going with this? Oh, there you are.
And
Good
it's
to
like
see
the
you.
way he stands, like that whole, because I don't know if it's fully him in general, but dude, the way that he did that whole just not inauguration, the way that he did induction, the way he did his whole speech, it just, the whole time I was like, Dave, what you doing up there?
My favorite is there are 3 kinds of Warren Zevon songs about badly behaving children. Number 2, about badly behaving relationships. And number 3, werewolves. Just love that, by the way. We are absolutely thrilled to have Josh Lovan here this morning. The fella from J.J. Keller has arrived on the scene, taking us a little further down the highway, kind of clarifying some rules, some regulations, and also with a special kind of focus on how those rules and regulations can help shape the culture of the institution that you work for, the institution that you run, or the institution that you hope to build. Big thanks for him being here this morning. How are you, my friend?
Man, I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
Well, I think we're having a good time. I mean, there's some people out there over in the chat.
Always ready to have a good time. That's absolutely right. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
You guys are always fired up early in the morning, and I love that.
And we are so glad to have you here, by the way. There's a lot of questions out there, by the way. There's a lot of people talking, a lot of back and forth about this medical examiner's certification rule. I thought we'd kind of begin by just kind of throwing you in the deep end and help us understand what that is. And take your time. You can unpack the thing because there's still a lot of questions out there, and I think you have some answers.
Yeah, you bet. There has been a lot of back and forth about it. And basically, it's a rule by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the FMCSA, that they're really trying to modernize how commercial driver medical certification data is handled. And this is not a really exciting topic, but it is really important. Typically, it replaces outdated paper-based processes, which secure kind of electronic transmissions of medical issues to improve safety, reduce fraud, and streamline enforcement. This went into effect in June 23rd, and there was a temporary waiver that was in effect until October 12th. And basically what this means is a driver typically would have to ensure that the medical examiner was on the list of medical examiners, and then they would be issued previously they would be issued a paper card. Now that medical examiner, kind of like the clearinghouse, do you remember that when that went through, motor carriers used to have to go in and grab information by calling previous employers, and now it's kind of a one-stop shop. Medical examiners are now directly inputting that medical information to the FMCSA, and so typically now you're not going to have CDL drivers are not going to have paper copies of that med card because it's going to be automatically uploaded to the system. And because it's a new process, it just had a lot of problems. Now, eventually, this will become a much easier process for drivers. Like, they're not going to have a med card with them. Everything's going to be uploaded to the state. And then the motor carrier will just simply run an MVR within 2 to 3 days, and they'll have their medical certification updated immediately. And the reason why this is such a big deal, guys, is a lot of times, sometimes these medical cards or the information would take weeks to get uploaded into the system. And now it should streamline that process towards within a 2 or 3 day period. And it'll just keep drivers on the road, because if a roadside officer runs that CDL and it doesn't show an active medical status that's approved, that driver can get put out of service on the road. And a lot of times it's just not the driver's fault. It's the medical examiner or something with one of the outdated processes. But this should streamline all these processes. But we're still kind of waiting for some states to kind of get in line so this thing can get past us.
Let me kind of go back a little bit here because there's a lot that you just unpacked coherently. I will add. I actually understood everything you said. I just want to make sure people understand this too. This is not just about, and it is about this as well, making sure that people who can't see aren't driving, making sure that people who can't hear aren't driving, making sure, or at least taking the mediating steps to rectify that, making sure that people aren't dropping dead behind the wheel because of health conditions. That's important as well, and making sure they're not getting hired. But it's also about long-term health strategies for the highway as well, and it's about being able to kind of study this by getting this stuff kind of, getting this stuff certified, getting this stuff kind of, regulated to a consistent pattern. It allows agencies to collect data and to begin to actually help people make long-term strategies for how we improve the health on the highway. I mean, that's fair, right? I mean, this is also about making sure that there's a streamlined one way of doing it so that when we collect data about who's not well, when the clearinghouses get looked at, we can begin to get a better sense of what the health and wellness on the highway is. Is that fair, Josh?
That's absolutely fair. Sometimes just you need some of these systems modern, kind of just brought up to speed, right? One of the things that caused a lot of problems with this was employers used to have to manually verify the examiner's credentials. They had to call their previous work about to gather information about their previous employment, their accident records, things like that, their employment history. But the biggest thing was the state driver's licensing agencies were just not really connected. They all kind of do their own thing. They input things at different dates. They have different deliverables. And so I'm glad to see the FMCSA kind of taking charge of this. And basically they're going to have the medical examiners directly upload this information. And so whether you're in Alaska or Maine, the upload process will be the same and consistent throughout the country. And when you have consistency, whether from a motor carrier perspective, a driver perspective, or a law enforcement perspective, things just always operate smoother when there's a direct process. So this is basically, it's causing a lot of headache for carriers in the states that haven't made the implementation deadline that we'll talk about in a little bit. But once we get past midway through next year, this will make drivers' lives much easier because it's just, they're not going to have to do near as much. Because right now the burden was really on the motor carrier and the driver, but now it's going to be on the medical examiner and the state driver's licensing agency to kind of get this process modernized. And so it makes a lot of sense to do this.
And, we've talked about, the big talk. And by the way, Tom will remember this. I'm going to go to left field here for a second. There actually is there's a small connection here to English compliance. And the small connection is the fact that it's about everybody being able to speak the same lingua franca. And what is happening here is that, as you mentioned, you talked about law enforcement, you talked about carriers, you talked about everybody. The idea is that if we streamline this process, that every single person who is in the supply chain actually will be speaking the same language when it comes to the enforcement of this, that there won't be any gray areas anymore where one person's healthy person is another person's shouldn't be on the road. The idea is to give everybody the same set of information that they can all work from together, and that's why what's going on with the card, the lack of medical card is so important, because if they can get that stuff down, having that medical card on you becomes less important because it's all part of one streamlined system. How'd I do?
Yeah, you did perfect. That absolutely sums it up correctly, and it will make it a much better process and put a lot of that burden off the driver's shoulders and really keep those safe drivers on the road. A lot of times, I know when I was in enforcement, if you run a CDL, the only thing officers can tell is that the medical information is maybe downgraded, it's not approved or not active, and the only thing a roadside officer can do is put that driver out of service. And a lot of times it's just not the driver's fault. that they're being placed out of service for a medical card issue. It's really the state's issue, and this will prevent a lot of that. So especially at all these CVSA roadside campaigns, things like that. Once a driver goes in and has their medical exam and gets their medical update within 2 to 3 days, gets that information uploaded, they're going to be kind of smooth sailing. They're going to have to worry. We're not going to have to worry about carrying a medical card and then the carrier running that MVR immediately. It's just all going to be a seamless process. And that's the way it should be. A driver should be able to go to their doctor, say, hey, I'm here for my 6-month or annual checkup. And then they should be able to walk out of that office and somebody else handle that administrative burden stuff. And that's basically what's happening here. FMCSA and those medical examiners are taking care of a lot of that stuff that the drivers used to have to.
Yeah, I always laugh because I've often said that anybody entering the state of Louisiana should see a sign that says DIP next 254 miles. And what often you hear when you drive through Louisiana on the interstate, a lot of people will tell you, actually most of the truck drivers who drive through Louisiana can tell you, thunk, thunk, thunk. This is one of the things that there are a couple of states out there who have not properly integrated yet. What is the holdup, Josh? What is taking these people so long? They're still not bad actors, just people who do things by their own rhythm. Who out there is not yet in compliance with what is going on?
Yeah, it's kind of some of the big ones that you would expect. It's Alaska's on there, but we're not too worried about there. But your kind of big three are California, Florida, and New York. There's a lot of drivers that originate out of California, Florida, and New York. Also, you can add Kentucky, Louisiana, New Hampshire, Oklahoma, and New Jersey to that list. But a lot of it is just the state driver's licensing agencies have to, just like when we go to the DMV, that's basically what this is. Those state driver's licensing agencies have to all get connected. They have to upgrade their oftentimes really old, deficient kind of programs to get up to speed, and then they have to get all the medical examiners on board to get this process ironed out. But there's 9 states that haven't met that compliance deadline. This started off being the original waiver was June 23rd. So they had, there was a temporary waiver that was in effect until the second week of October. Now that extension's been, they've extended the waiver until January 10th of this year. So they can basically make their systems communicate with the federal systems. And, it's kind of the same kind of the states that you would expect to see there. And it's not because they're doing a poor job. It's just because they have a lot more folks there that they've got to deal with. So
I'm actually going to make it. Can I make a joke about all these states? They fall into 3 categories. Here's the okay. Here we go. California, meaning Sacramento, Florida, meaning Tallahassee, and then of course New York, meaning Albany. Sometimes confuse themselves with the capital of the United States. And Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, New Hampshire, New Jersey, Oklahoma, and Vermont. All of those places have an odd habit of kind of being the most idiosyncratic of the states. Each one of them has a very definable personality. So I'm not surprised. The third category, as you pointed out, is Alaska. That's just a different animal entirely, and it's going to take them forever. That's not a lot of people. That's a lot of space and a lot of ways to kind of bring all that together. But you make a good point. It's places that have interesting or kind of spread out terrain, or it's places that have a lot of folks, and that seems to be what's going on there, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right there. That's perfectly summed up. So they'll get on board like they always do. It's just taking them a little bit longer to get all this information kind of processed, and basically just to update their systems is what they're waiting for.
Josh, we're talking to truck drivers here, and I know a lot of them, the question on their mind are best practices for getting that new exam. And I know it's like, and anytime we have to do anything new, especially given all the stuff that the men and women who we talk with have so much on their plate in regards to pre-trip, post-trip, and the trip that actually happens. Go reassure people that this actually is a process that's actually going to make it better for them, and there's some expectations they can have when they go to get their new lack of card.
Yeah. Basically, when drivers go in for the updated physical, they really need to ask the doctor with the medical card to provide them. They need to ask for a medical card, even though the doctors aren't required to issue them anymore. And we have heard instances where doctors are kind of fighting that. But during this waiver, where they don't have to have that information, they got 60 days to use that medical card. So they really need that paper card. Even if the doctor kind of balks at that and says, "Hey, we don't have to do that. We're submitting your information to the National Registry directly now, and it'll be forwarded to the states." But drivers, basically the best thing you can do is just almost demand, like, "Hey, I need a physical medical card," because there's a lot of issues with this integration process with medical cards. And if I have my physical copy, I don't have to worry about it. Even though a CDL driver doesn't have to carry a med card, while this is in queue, it's the best thing you can do is it's better to have it than not need it, right? And not have it, need it.
Yeah, and by the way, for now, Trucker's Voices on the chat said, "Just did my medical exam about a month ago, and the medical examiners told me I did not have to take it down to the DMV, that they would upload everything and just to check and follow up." That's the other thing as well, too. Ronald Reagan's great adage of trust but verify, and the idea that I'm glad this system is working so well. Can I get a sheet of paper saying that you did it? And by the way, where am I supposed to check and do my diligence to make sure it's there? At least for the first couple of months of this, for a while, as they kind of get onboarded, it might be a great idea, as you point out, to do a little diligence, a little trusting, but some verification along the way.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And for drivers that are kind of caught off guard on this, that's why we always recommend, like, hey, make sure you get a medical card from your doctor in case you go through. If you're an interstate driver crossing state lines, you've got enforcement agencies that in one of these down to 9 states now instead of 11, by the way. It's 9. I think Wyoming jumped on board recently, so they've fallen off the list. But the big 3, California, Florida, New York, New Jersey, if you're going through those kind of states that haven't got their process is updated, if you've got a medical card, that waiver that's been extended through January, officers are only going to have to, as long as you've got a hard copy of your medical card, you're going to get a free pass until at least January 10th. And if you don't have that med card, here's the deal. Like, if I'm a roadside officer and you've just relied on the doctor and that state driver's licensing agency to kind of do what they were supposed to do, a driver can get placed out of service, and maybe it may take up to a week or two before they get clarity and before they get the issue resolved for them. So it's really not fair to a driver to get placed out of service when they've done nothing wrong. So the best advice, make sure you get a copy of that med card. It's really important.
By the way, Trucker's Voices has a comment that I wanted to kind of frame as a question. He also added, after talking about what happened at at his medical examiner, he said, "I always ask for a long form of the medical exam as well." Is that a good idea?
Yeah, asking for, anybody can get a copy of their medical information. Having a long form oftentimes is scary for a motor carrier, because it has a lot of that HIPAA information in there, has a lot of that information. So most motor carriers aren't required to have the long form anymore. But if you're a driver and you want your complete, like, hey, this is everything, and you want to carry that around until this process is complete, that's even a better idea. So that's perfect.
Final kind of thought as well, too, because I always like to kind of talk about cultural questions with you here as well. If you are a small business owner or a small fleet owner, are there approaches to kind of make sure that your whole business is compliant? A lot of the stuff is being taken off the plate and being streamlined and kind of unified, but what can a culture of safety do to kind of promote making sure everybody is like on board with this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we get that question from safety departments that are trying to manage this process. And again, it's more of the safety department than the driver. The driver, unfortunately, is the one that gets put out of service through no fault of their own. But what safety departments need to do, a lot of times they'll use some type of platform to notify them that, hey, I've got drivers this month with medical cards that are expiring, or maybe endorsements or their CDLs expiring, and maybe have a tickler system that kind of just shows who's due up this month. the best thing they can do is to be very proactive and start this process early. Don't wait. If your medical information's expiring within 2 weeks, that's way too late. You need to be on this 60 days in advance. That way you can just ensure there's no problem. So if you're proactively managing a lot of drivers from a safety department, you really need to have a monthly safety meeting kind of deal to talk about this and just be very transparent about how the system, it's not our fault. It's kind of out of our hands, but to make sure we don't have an interruption in your driving or status, we need to make sure we go early. So make sure you send your drivers early for those medical updates. That way, if there is a problem, you can work through it instead of being called on the roadside by your driver saying, "Hey, I've been placed out of service. What's going on?" So just be proactive and get started 60 days in advance instead of waiting maybe 2 weeks before the deadline, before the expiration date.
Okay, we're going to shift here. We got about 8 minutes left. Josh Lovan joins us this morning. He, of course, is the latest and the greatest fellow from J.J. Keller. I'm saying that because I think Bray is probably lurking around. I want to take a shot at him. My favorite fan of Big Trouble in Little China. I hope you're listening, Tom. Let's talk a little bit about the English language proficiency regulation. There are a lot of people. Look, Jane Jazrawi, our friend from Carrier's Edge, was talking about this. There are a number of people who, look, there's a lot of stuff that's getting rolled up here that needs to be rolled up, but there are some people who have some concerns about not getting a fair shake because of, Chris Orban talked about this last week. Some people have nerves when they get, you and I both know this. I've literally had to smile and talk in a low tone to people when I used to wear a uniform because a lot of people freeze up and suddenly lose the ability to speak the English language in front of a law enforcement officer. But it's not as hard as it sounds, by the way. It's just making sure, especially when it comes to electronic signs, that you can actually read the world around you and be able to communicate successfully. Talk about what people can expect.
Yeah, on the English language proficiency, there's been a lot of stuff going on with this, and like I probably mentioned before, I was at CVSA with Tom when in New Orleans last May when this kind of came down. We were actually all together, and so the idea of this is that they kind of developed a two-part system. The first one, just an interview, like expect an officer just like me to come up and say, "Hey, my name's Officer Lovan. Where are you coming from? Where are you being dispatched to, and where are you going? Can you provide your driver's logs for me? And I need your permit book," and questions that are just very generic like that. And if the officer feels like that there is a potential language kind of a language issue there, they'll proceed to phase 2, which is reading signs. And they've kind of got like, hey, what's a yield sign, a stop sign, a speed limit sign, and they'll have that driver explain in English what that sign is supposed to mean. And there's a lot of officer discretion going on here, and you knew that it would. And officer discretion simply is an officer has the option to either issue a citation or not based on how they feel that driver did. And so the biggest issue right now going on is there's a few states that are not really complying with this. And you'll see some stuff in the news issued by FMCSA, especially in California. Again, California doesn't appear to be really enforcing the English proficiency standard, and so this administration's threatening to kind of remove federal funding from California and a few other states in the Northwest. But that's it. They're just basically trying to have a two-phased approach. There's the interview phase, just like when you get pulled over by an officer. They're going to ask you questions in English, and then they'll proceed to asking you, can you identify what kind of signs these are? And if the officer feels that the driver passed that, it'll be clear to go. But the biggest change, as you know, or maybe everybody doesn't know, the biggest change is if a driver can't speak fluently in English or adequately in English to the officer, it's now an out of service violation. So, if you've got a driver you dispatch from Texas and they're in, 1,000 miles away, you've now got a real issue when previously it was just a citation, but now it's an out-of-service citation. And to correct that out-of-service violation, you have to prove that driver now can speak English proficiently, and that's hard to do if you've been placed out of service, to put a driver back in service within 3 or 4 days and say, hey, in this 3 or 4 day period, this driver can now speak. And that's essentially the problem that's happening in California. They're just not really enforcing it. And so that's kind of what you're seeing in the news right now. But that's kind of the basis of it.
By the way, we had a little bit of hustle and bustle behind me while I was talking to Josh Lovan here. Somebody actually took us up on we actually gave the address out of the studio, and somebody took us up on it and sent us breakfast by DoorDash that arrived just now. The other thing is, too, Josh, in the very limited time we have left, just to kind of let people, like I said, I mean, everybody's got concerns about, federal overreach and all that kind of stuff, but this is not unprecedented in regards to withholding highway and federal funds. This was what they did with the driving age too. Basically, they're like, you can have you can have the drinking age, whatever you want to have it, but if you don't make it 21, we're going to withhold federal funds from you, and it's part of the same strategy. I'm also wondering, just in our crystal ball, I'm wondering how much of how many enforcement agents are sitting on the border of Arizona and, of course, a number of the border states of California just waiting, being like, come on, come across here. We'll check your English proficiency. And that might be something interesting as well, too, that might actually cause some interesting dilemmas over the next couple of months until California gets itself compliant. We've only got about a minute left here. Josh, is there anything else you want to add before we shuffle off this radio coil with you?
Yeah, it's always great to be here. The thing I'll leave with right now is there's a lot of issues with non-domiciled CDLs. Those, drivers in Canada and Mexico, there's reciprocity in the United States for those drivers to operate here in the States. But drivers who aren't from Mexico or Canada that get driver's license, what they found is up to 25% of those non-domiciled CDLs that have been issued are issued in error or illegally. And so that's kind of what the next phase we'll get into. We'll get into some of those issues. California, just literally yesterday, they're saying that California issued 17,000 commercial driver's licensings. They've issued them illegally, and they basically sent 17,000 notices to those CDL holders saying, hey, your stuff's being canceled in the next 60 days. So we'll get into that later, non-domiciled CDLs. But for right now, we're hoping and wishing that everything gets better and clear and safer on the roadways. That's why we do this thing, right?
Absolutely. Josh Lovan of J.J. Keller. Go to jjkeller.com. J.J. Keller on X. On Instagram, J.J. Keller Association. J.J. Keller on the Tube of You. And, of course, you can find them over on LinkedIn. Thank you, Josh. Always love having you.
I appreciate it, guys.